Thank you. Traditions. You know, traditions are those things that we come together as a society or a family, and we decide that they're important to us. Traditions are those things that make life a little extra special, and time and again we've found that as traditions begin to die, the rest seems to fall apart. This spot where we have gathered today was part of Woodhaven's tradition. Nearly a century ago, it was where the annual Memorial Day parade ended. You know, they used to start at Whiting Square, and they used to go along 91st Avenue to 98th Street, down 98th Street, along Jamaica Avenue, up Forest Parkway, and end here. That's a real hike. In those days, in the earliest days, most of the soldiers who attended were recently returned from their service from the Great War, or what would become known as World War I. Here's something that might interest you. In this very spot, in those early observances, there were many veterans of the Civil War that sat right here as part of the Memorial Day ceremonies. So why was this spot chosen? So it might help to explain by telling you a little bit about the story of a man named Arthur Engels. Have any of you ever heard of him? No. He was a young man who lived here in Woodhaven. He lived right on Jamaica Avenue. He lived above Young's Butcher Shop, which was a butcher shop that was very popular and was around for about 60 years. Nowadays, or many years later, it became known as Carlo's Pizzeria. So you know the spot where he lived. Every time you pass by, you'll know that's where Arthur Engels lived. He was well known for running around the neighborhood. He would run, and you got to remember, in those days, there wasn't a lot of houses. There was a lot of empty space and farms. And he was a great athlete. He competed at Madison Square Garden, in which he won. He set several world records. Every time people looked up, they saw Arthur running around Woodhaven. He took the nickname, they gave him the nickname King of the Eastern Hurdlers because of the records that he set. So Arthur Engels was drafted into service in early 1918 and went to Camp Upton on Long Island, where he was trained as a supply sergeant. By the end of the year, Arthur Engels, now Lieutenant Engels, was headed over there. But Lieutenant Engels never came home. He received a very bad leg wound, and one can only imagine what this young man must have been thinking, realizing that he was never going to run again. His wound got worse, and within a couple of weeks, he passed away. Back home, families would nervously look at the newspaper every week to see the latest casualties. And at first, it was just a few injuries, but then there were reports of deaths. At first it was 1 soldier, 2 soldiers, 4, 6, 8. Not only from Woodhaven, but from Glendale, Ozone Park, Cypress Hills, Richmond Hill, all around us. Woodhaven was hit extremely hard. There were 70 in all young men who were killed. 70 young men whose promises to promise to our community would go unfulfilled. So the community looked for a special way to commemorate their sacrifice. And a unique idea was suggested, the planting of these memorial trees, one in each name of the soldier, of each soldier that was killed during the war. And this effort was led by a coalition which would eventually become American Legion Post 118, led by their first post commander, James Pasta. These trees were planted right along Forest Park Drive, and they were dedicated in a ceremony right here in this very spot 98 years ago. And this is what's important to remember about these trees, because thereafter, the families would come up here for Memorial Day, and they would decorate these trees. These trees weren't just a memorial to them. These trees were the embodiment of their loved ones. And they would come up to the tree that represented their soldier, their loved one, and they would decorate it. Each year, the Memorial Day parade would end up here in front of a big granite monument, which was paid for by the community. The granite monument sat either over there or Remember there used to be a triangle over here in the middle? We think it might have sat there. And then what happened was, after all those years of decorating and ending the parades here, they moved the monument. And the reason they moved it was they widened Woodhaven Boulevard. They knocked down the old American Legion. The city paid them money. They built a new American Legion with a beautiful front yard. And the American Legion said, hey, we need something to go in our front yard. And they moved the monument from here to where it sits now on 89th Avenue in the front of the American Legion. And anytime you go there, whether you go for the senior center or any kind of community event, look at that monument and see those names and realize that those names correspond to these trees. And you'll see Arthur Engel's name on that monument. The trees over time were forgotten until a few years ago when residents from the community and students from St. Thomas the Apostle and members of the ROTC from Franklin K. Lane joined American Legion Post 118 and Post 118's American Legion Auxiliary and revived the tradition of decorating these trees. And now with this co-naming, which was done with great speed, thanks to a swift response from Council Member Elizabeth Crowley and her staff, led by Kate Mooney, more people will learn of this tradition and remember and honor the sacrifice of the 70 young men from Woodhaven who went over there and never came home. But the co-naming is not just about these young men and their sacrifices. This road between here and Glendale and Richmond Hill contains several memorials, including Strack Pond, which was named after Lawrence Strack, the first local soldier to lose his life in Vietnam. The pond used to be a ball field where Lawrence played as a boy. And this past March marked 50 years since Lawrence Strack gave his life, and his name lives on here in Forest Park Memorial Drive. From World War II through the Korean War, memorials to the sacrifices of the soldier can be found along this road. And now, thanks to the support of our local elected officials, our local groups and organizations, and our community, this road has a name that lives up to the names of Lieutenant Arthur Engels and Private First Class Lawrence Strack. And it would make their families proud. It'll help future generations keep up the tradition of remembering their sacrifices and supporting those young men and women currently in harm's way. So ladies and gentlemen, we proudly welcome you to Forest Park Memorial Drive. Thank you.